dark here, aren't we? Shouldn't it?
No, we're not.
It's okay. All right.
Okay, we're live. So we're just waiting for people to join.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll just wait a minute or so to have more folks join, and then we'll get started. See all the hearts?
Mm-hmm.
Those are people sending hearts.
Floating hearts.
Yeah. People are saying hello, love from Ireland. Nice. Hello from Melbourne. Hello. Awesome. Okay, wow, we jumped up to almost 1,300 pretty quickly, so I think we can get started.
In Melbourne, it's tomorrow already.
Well, hello tomorrow. So welcome everybody to our 4th Instagram Live. This is obviously Gabor Maté. I'm his daughter, Hannah Maté. We're really happy to be joining you today, and we appreciate your patience as we postponed this event from the spring. So we'll be actually answering some of the questions that you submitted in the spring, and we're happy to get to them today. But before we do that, my dad's going to share a little bit about his book that's coming out just in a matter of weeks, which is very exciting.
Yeah, so it's an exciting time for me because my new book that I've been working on for 10 years and 2.5 years of just difficult writing. It was a hard process. Anyway, I'm finally holding it in my hands for the first time. It just arrived last night. This is the book. It's called The Myth of Normal: Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. And it contains pretty much everything I know, I think. And it'll be published in just over 2 weeks on September the 13th. Eventually, it'll be published in 25 languages, beginning in English on September the 13th, in the UK, in Canada, and in the US, I think also in Australia. And then subsequently in 24 other languages. I'll be doing an extensive book tour through North America and parts of Europe in September and October. But I don't have to tell you, it's my 5th book, but I'm excited about it as I ever was because it's also my most comprehensive and, as I said before, the most difficult one to write. And I did have the help of my brilliant son, Hannah's brilliant brother, Daniel, to write this book. And I'm very excited to share it with the world, which is all I'm going to say about it today. But after the book launch in a few weeks, we'll do another Instagram just about the book itself, Instagram Live, with my co-writer, Daniel. So with that, we're ready to welcome you and also to take the questions that you've submitted.
Awesome. Thanks, Dad. So if you've joined us before, we take questions, we source the questions from you. We do our best to answer as many as we can in an hour. This time we had almost 200 questions, and they were all great questions. We obviously can't answer all of them, so we've picked some that we thought might resonate with a lot of you out there, even if we don't pick your specific question. And so just, inviting you to listen with an open mind and heart that this might relate to you or someone you know in some way, even if your question didn't get picked today. And the questions, are typically about people who've experienced trauma. So we're going to be talking about some difficult things, some delicate things today. So, all right. Without further ado. So someone asked the question, how do I amend my relationships after being in a dissociated state for the past 8 years, mainly with my kids? I can't help but feel I was a terrible influence on them.
Well, thanks for the question. Notice that there's a degree of guilt in your question. When you say terrible influence, that's a self-accusation. And so notice there the lack of kindness to yourself. Now, the same question could be asked in a compassionate way, which is that I'm afraid that my dissociation perhaps had a negative impact on my children. And how do I amend that? Now, that's a fair question. But terrible influence, and there's a heavy load of guilt in that formulation. Now, you have to begin by being kind to yourself. I don't know how old you are, I don't know how your kids are. But if you're in a dissociative state, that means you're disassociated from reality in some ways. Now, what is that all about? You didn't make a choice to be in a dissociated state. Nobody makes that choice. It's the organism's wisdom. It means that at some point you're having so much stress or so much traumatic imprint arising in your life that the way your organism could think to defend you was to disconnect you from all that. So that's what dissociation is all about. It's not something that you did. It's something that occurred within you really as a result of the wisdom of your organism to reduce your subjective suffering because you didn't have other help available. Now, if this happened to you in adulthood, then for sure it happened to you in childhood, whether you call that or not. This didn't begin all of a sudden in adulthood. So at some point, my guess would be, and I have no way to prove it, not having a chance to speak to you personally, but my guess would be that when you were small and very helpless, you were badly hurt by something or somebody, some circumstance, and your organism could only defend itself by dissociating. So that dynamic of dissociation has been imprinted in your nervous system. Then when in adulthood...
Sorry, I just want to say we have a bumblebee buzzing around in here. So if you hear buzzing, someone's trying to get it out the door, but that's what it is.
These bumblebees, they always get in the way.
We love them, we need them, but not in the living room.
That's what Winnie the Pooh said. He said, you can never trust those bees. In any case, going back to the question, so dissociation was probably a dynamic that your organism invoked when you were small, and now it's been re-triggered by stresses in your adult life. So the first thing you got to do is understand that this was just a self-protective mechanism. Now, will it have a negative impact on your children? Yes, it will have had a negative impact on your children. But not as negative as it would have been if you had all of a sudden started acting out your trauma on them in some more overt, hostile way. So even there, even for your children, it played a protective function. At the same time, of course, when somebody's in a dissociated state, they're not as available to the people that they love as they'd like to be. And that lack of availability, that lack of emotional presence would have had a negative impact on your children. So, yes, and as my daughter can tell you, my own absent-mindedness and kind of tuned out ways of being would have had a negative impact on my own children. And it did. Now, how do you deal with it? Two things. One is, well, three things I would say. Drop all the self-accusation. Drop any sense that you have irretrievably harmed your children. You have not. You have the capacity to heal. They have the capacity to heal. So don't forget that. Number one. Number two, keep up the work of healing yourself. That's the biggest gift you can give your children, is to heal yourself. That means you'll be as fully present for them as possible. Thirdly, you might want to, if you can, take up some practice of mindful awareness so that you can really be in the present moment. I'm not a very disciplined person in many ways. In some ways I'm very disciplined, in other ways I'm not. Recently, I was feeling somewhat emotionally unbalanced. I took up meditation again. And you know what? After a few days, it's made a huge difference for me. So take up some kind of a practice. And fourth, choose every opportunity you can get to be there with your kids, to enjoy them, to have fun with them, to be present with them, to give them a sense of invitation to be with you. When you were dissociated, you couldn't issue that kind of invitation. Now that you're back from that, and it sounds like you are, just stuff them full of loving attention till it's coming out of their ears. So that's...
May I?
Sorry?
May I?
Please, yeah.
In a attuned way.
Absolutely.
So with sometimes stuffing someone with loving attention until it comes out of their ears actually means really slowing down and listening to their cues and following their lead.
Exactly.
Yeah. So he's not talking about smothering. He's talking about really attuned presence. Exactly. Yeah. Mirroring their feelings, joining them in activities that you both enjoy, being in the moment together, reveling in them.
That's very good. Have you ever thought about studying psychology?
I'll consider it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else you want to say about that?
No, that's good.
Okay. This is semi-related. It's another trauma response. To dissociate is a trauma response. And it's connected, it can be connected with the state of being frozen. Mm-hmm. So this question is about being frozen. So this person says, my life seems frozen with fear. Fear of change, fear to love, fear of passing of time, fear of regret. Tips how to break this cycle, please.
Yeah. Two key words in that question. My life seems frozen. To seem and to be are not the same thing. So it's a matter of who's looking. So it's not that your life is frozen. It's that you are experiencing a sense of frozenness. So don't make it about life. It's about you, which is a good thing, because you can do something about. Now, frozenness, as I was saying before about dissociation, is simply a defensive response. And it's part of your nervous system. So a great contemporary neuroscientist, Dr. Stephen Porges, Porges, has studied the nervous system, and he points out that when we feel safe, when there's a sense of safety in the world, which is our birthright, infants, children deserve to feel safe, then a part of the nervous system is activated, which he calls the social engagement system. In the social engagement system, you feel alive, you feel vibrant, you're present, you're connected with other people, you look at them, you listen to them, you receive them, they receive you. That's the social engagement mode. And that's a function of a certain part of our nervous system. Now, when there's threat, then there's defensive responses. And in that defensive response, first of all, we fight or we escape. And that's the activation of another part of our nervous system. When fight or flight is not available, then we dissociate, we freeze and so on. Especially when the threat is overwhelming, we just freeze. That's what an animal does. It's not just human beings. A mouse threatened by a cat and about to be snapped up by the cat's jaws will actually freeze. That frozenness serves two possible purposes. One is the cat might think that it's dead and won't touch it. Or even if the cat does grab the mice, in that frozen state, the mouse doesn't experience the same kind of pain. So it's protective. So that frozenness is a response to an overwhelming threat that the organism doesn't know how otherwise to deal with.
Can I offer something?
No, just before you do. Now again, if you're experiencing this in adulthood, however old you are, it means for sure that you experienced it in childhood. And so that your frozenness was the only possible response of your organism. Because there was no help available. Had there been help available, you wouldn't have had to either escape or to fight or to freeze. So, first of all, it's not about you. This is not your true nature. This is just a defensive response, a programmed, ingrained, old defensive response on the part of your organism. You need help. You need safety. So you got to talk to somebody. You got to get some help. I'm going to recommend one resource for you. There's a woman called Deb Dana, D-A-N-A. And Deb took this little nutshell explanation of the nervous system that I just gave you is the work of a great researcher called Dr. Stephen Porges, P-O-R-G-E-S. It's called the polyvagal theory. I'm not going to go into the details of it. Deb Dana is a clinician who's taken this kind of understanding and has created practices around it. So Deb has written a couple of books on how to work with your nervous system to create safety. And I'm just reviewing her most recent book now. It'll be out in a few months. But she had another one. I suggest you check out her work, Deb Dana, D-A-N-A. You'll understand your nervous system and you'll get some practices about how to work with it. But really, ideally, you'll work with a live person as well. But again, don't be critical of yourself. Don't feel hopeless about it. It's a normal response of your nervous system to something that happened to you. And it doesn't have to stay that way. And by the way, I've got news for you. The very fact that you joined this call and you asked this question means that you're not frozen, does it? So, Hannah, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say you're talking about overwhelming fear in childhood without having a way to get safety at the time, right?
Right.
So I just wanted to share something from my attachment work. I'm a PhD student studying clinical psychology, and I do research on attachment. And one thing that we talk about in that world, we talk about children who experience disorganized attachment. That is, they don't have a coherent strategy to orient to safety in their early life because the environment is threatening. Those who they would normally go to for safety are themselves overwhelming, scary, threatening.
Yeah.
So another way of putting that is called fright without solution.
Right.
So when you have this fear and you have nowhere to go with it, you freeze.
So a feeling without dealing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's really, when we talk about attachment styles, we're not just talking about ways of orienting, we're talking about strategies for seeking safety.
Unconscious strategies.
Unconscious strategies for seeking safety that become actually behavioral strategies that you can see.
Absolutely.
Right? So a secure infant, which will turn into a secure adult, has the strategy that when they're upset, they go towards safety. They go towards their caregiver. Yeah. And once they're reminded of that safety, that's by accessing their secure base, they can go off and explore again. Now, I won't go over all of the types, but just to say that a child who's got a disorganized attachment system means they don't have a strategy. So what you need, I'm not diagnosing you as having disorganized attachment, but if you're talking about being frozen in fear, maybe something to look at here in therapy. But it sounds like what you need is strategy, solution. And I agree that reaching out to someone for help, either a counselor or when you're feeling this way, calling a friend who you feel somatically safe with, is a solution when you did not have a solution when you were younger.
Check out the practices that Deb Dana
Sure.
would teach you. By the way, Hannah, would you not say that there was an element to that in our relationship when you were small?
I don't know, Dad, but I actually don't want to get into that right now.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. But what I was going to say was that frozen is not just a mental state, it's also a somatic state, right?
Oh yeah, it's absolutely the whole body.
Yeah. So I would also kind of consider what a strategy could be that would be body based.
Yeah.
Can you put your hand on your heart and remember who you are, where you are? Can you do gentle movement or go for a walk? Are there any exercises that you like, or dancing or anything like that? But really just also looking to the body, and not just trying to figure it out from the mind, I would say.
Or find a therapist who works with the body.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, speaking of which, we have a relevant question.
Yeah.
How to create boundaries with an overbearing parent?
Who? Me?
It's a great question. Love this question.
Okay. Well, of course, that's the only kind of parent that you have to create boundaries with, isn't it? You know? Well, here's the problem. These boundaries should emerge naturally in childhood. Part of the process of the basis of human development, there's sort of 3 stages to it. First of all, there's attachment, and Hannah talked about attachment. And attachment is the relationship, the closeness, the contact, the proximity with a parent. If that attachment is appropriate, then a child feels safe enough to start to individuate, to become their own person. And that means setting boundaries. And by the way, infants, or I should say young children, do this automatically. What is the first thing that a child starts saying at age 1.5?
Yes.
They start saying no. So, you want to put your shoes on? No. Well, in a sense, that's totally irrational, but it's not irrational from a point of view of development, because the child, in order to individuate, has to be able to say no. If they don't know how to say no, yeses don't mean anything at all. So no is a natural boundary-setting device that nature gives us. In our stupidity, we call that the terrible twos. There's nothing terrible about it. It's perfectly healthy for the child. They're going to say no before they can learn to say yes. What happens is, if the parent is overwhelming or overbearing, then the child learns that if I say no, I'm going to lose the contact or the care or the attachment with my parent. So I must suppress my no. So it's not a question of learning how to develop boundaries. Those boundaries develop automatically in the process of individuation when the attachment is safe enough. In the absence of that safety, and notice how safety is the theme today, in the absence of that safety, those boundaries don't develop. So now your question is, as an adult, and my parent is still overbearing, or at least I'm experiencing them that way, how do I learn to set boundaries? Well, you have to ask yourself, am I still that young child who needs the parent's approval, attunement, acceptance? Or can I be my own person? And what is the cost that I pay if I'm not my own person? Because it's true, if you set a boundary and if you say no, your parent might resent it. And you might even feel guilty. But if you don't say no, then the resentment is going to be in you. And that's much more toxic than any sense of guilt. So my advice to people has been for a long time, if you can choose between guilt and resentment, choose the guilt every time. So if you're going to say no to your parent, you might have to put up with 2 things, their resentment and your sense of guilt. But you're going to be the winner in the long term. So here's what you need to ask yourself. In my relationship with my parent, where am I not saying no? They can't force you to be that way anymore. You don't have that dependent relationship anymore. You did, but you don't anymore. So now you have a risk that you have to take. I'm going to set a boundary. I'm going to say no to the way you talk to me or what you demand of me. I'm going to say no, and you may not like that. And I may even have some guilt for disappointing you. But I'm going to choose your dislike, and I'm going to choose my guilt over suppressing myself and then resenting it afterwards. So to sum this up, ask yourself, in that relationship, where do I not say no? And what's the reason why I don't? And who would I be if I could say no? By the way, there's whole chapters on that in this new book, on the question you asked just now, which is all about being authentically yourself. So it's a tough challenge, but one that's to your benefit to ask and to explore. And believe me, I know what it's like to be an overbearing parent sometimes.
All right. So speaking of which,
Yes.
I'll speak to this one. I think the advice you gave was good.
But?
No, I'm just going to add.
Okay.
There's, when you talk about being yourself, being authentic, if you've had an overbearing parent, that might not be such an easy task to know who you are.
Right.
Because that's the whole point, is that if your boundaries have been violated, then it might have been hard for you to differentiate or to know yourself as independent from your parents' thoughts and opinions and feelings and all this. So that might mean taking some space away from the relationship to sort out who you are and what you think and what you feel. And the other thing that I would offer is, if your parent is overbearing, chances are you know that because you feel uncomfortable in some way.
Mm-hmm.
It feels too much, and you probably feel it somewhere in your body. You might liken it to feeling overburdened or stifled or suffocated, or what's another adjective I can use?
Well, frustrated for sure.
Frustrated, and disempowered, and maybe even angry. And if you're feeling any of those types of ways, that's a pretty good indication that your own voice is saying something there about what it needs. That doesn't mean you need to communicate your boundary from that place to your parent. It doesn't mean you have to yell no or insult them or be rude or be angry at them outwardly. What that does mean, though, is to pay attention and honor those feelings. Take time to sort out, okay, well, maybe if there's anger here, I'm not ready to be in relationship, or I'm not ready to be in relationship in this type of way.
Didn't you say that to me just last week?
Did I say that to you just last week?
Did you not say to me that right now I need to take some space?
I don't want to. Okay, this is me setting a boundary right now, in real time, that I don't want you to keep bringing up, asking me questions about how I feel in the relationship. And if I choose to share something, I'm sharing it.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's an example right there of a boundary. And we're laughing about it, you see. It's possible to be conscientious and also direct.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. How about this question?
Mm-hmm.
How to help a loved one from depression when they are unwilling to get help?
The answer is you can't. You have two choices. You have three choices. Two of them are sane and one of them is insane. You can say to this person, not necessarily in so many words, but you can take the attitude, this is how that is for them right now. They're not willing to change. They're not willing to work on it. They're not ready for it. They're too stuck or too scared or whatever's happening for them. I'm just going to be there for them in as loving and accepting way as possible. I'm not trying to change them at all. That's perfectly legitimate. But you have to mean it and act it and not keep trying to get them to be different than the way they are. The second sane thing to say, again, I'm not talking about words, I'm talking about an attitude, is the way you are is too painful for me. I can't be around it. It's too upsetting for me. I'm sorry, I love you very much, but I can't handle it. That's not your problem, it's my problem. It brings me down too much. It threatens me too much. It makes me feel too bad. I gotta take some space. That's legitimate too. The third method, or the third approach, which is insane, is I'm gonna stay in your life and I'm gonna keep bugging you to be different than the way you are. I'm gonna try and help you. I'm gonna try and change you. I'm gonna try and pull you out of your depression. That means that you're dependent on them to be different than the way they are so you can feel better. That means you're using them. And they're going to resist that and resent it. So those are the three approaches, the three attitudes you can take. Either one of the first two is emotionally intelligent and actually loving. The third one is self-defeating and can only poison a relationship. So that's what I say about that.
I also think of the work of Byron Katie, where she says to turn it around, right?
Right.
So often when we're insistent that someone else change, there's something that someone else, do the work differently, that they should change. There's something we're not looking at. So
in ourselves.
So are there any ways that you need help?
Yeah.
That you need support, either from depression or otherwise, that it's been difficult for you to reach out and get it?
Because if you feel frustrated at their failure to change, that's your problem. The frustration is yours. Okay?
Yeah. I'll just end with a strength here. Is obviously you care about this person, right?
That's true.
They're a loved one to you. And it's really difficult to see someone that you love suffer. It's really, really difficult. It's not a small task.
Yeah.
So it's journey work, you could say, to really take care to set the boundary in that way, to not take it on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, how about this one? You mentioned that it's better to have your kids around parents rather than their peers. However, my parents were emotionally immature and religious, so I couldn't wait to get away from them. What would your advice be in that situation?
Yeah. So, how human beings, the way we live in modern society, and this is again a subject covered in my new book, is the way we live in modern society is completely alien to how human beings evolved. Human beings evolved not in isolated nuclear family units with stressed or disturbed parents, but with living in communities where there were lots of adults around and their parents had lots of support. So it wasn't a question of isolated couples raising children on their own, but of grandparents, and uncles and aunts and cousins and friends and so on, all being together. So parents had a lot more support, and children naturally had a lot more support from caring adults. Now, in the modern world, we have largely lost that. And since most kids don't see their parents most of the day, their brains are missing this attachment. And so who do they turn to? They turn to whoever's around, which is the peer group. And so a lot of kids today become far more oriented, taking their direction from how to be, how to walk, how to talk from their peers than from healthy adults. So it's in that context that my psychologist friend and I, Gordon Neufeld, we wrote this book together called Hold On to Your Kids, Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers. We make the case that children need healthy adult attachments so that they don't get lost in the peer group. Now that's assuming healthy adult attachments. Now your question says, what happens if those adult attachments are not healthy? Well, for some kids, their peer group is a lifesaver in that kind of context. That at least the kids have somebody who'll befriend them and accompany them and support them. So unfortunately, in modern society, for some children in those kind of inhospitable home environments that you describe, the peer group can be a lifesaver in a certain sense, that itself is kind of a tragedy, but it is like that. So I don't want to make a blanket statement that in all cases it's better. Now, what would have been ideal, but obviously it wasn't available to you, is that if your parents were as limited and as constricted in their capacity to support you and to see you and to understand you as you indicate that they were, that there would have been other adults around. Some uncle, some grandparent, some family friend that you could have turned to a healthy adult. But probably that wasn't available to you either. So in that context, it may very well be that the peer group became your life support. But in general, ideally, there'd be some adult around to at least mitigate the impact of that negative relationship at home. A school counselor, anybody, ideally.
Okay. How can I heal from the wounds created by the actions and words of my abusive mother? I have a tendency to find abusive and narcissistic partners now. I become abusive myself with kind partners. I suffer a lot both ways.
Yeah. Well, there's no easy how-to here. You need therapy. Now, understanding that there's nothing more natural than that you would seek out abusive partners. You're programmed to do so. It's not a fault on your part. It's not a mistake. Because as a child, whose love did you most want? You most wanted the love of your abusive mother. So that you associated the desire for love with an abusive situation. Therefore, when you unconsciously recognize, it's not that you deliberately choose abusive partners. It's not like you put an ad in the paper saying, I want an abusive partner. It's that you're unconscious, your childhood programmed unconscious, when they come across a potential partner in whom you energetically recognize that abusive potential, you get all excited. That's the love I want. That's the person whose love I want. Hoping that this time it'll be different. But of course it never is. And on the other hand, you'll have contempt and you'll be bored with people who are kind. People who just want to genuinely love you, but that's not where you're looking for love, because that's not what you recognize as the source of the love that you want. So, the very fact that you recognize this is a huge step forward. But it means, now there's one more thing I'll say. I've talked to a lot of people who've been in an abusive relationship, and here's what I asked them. Before the abuse began, before the abuse became overt, was there any part of you, was there any kind of niggling gut feeling that said, this is not right? Retrospectively, do you recognize that there was a kind of a no inside you, but you didn't pay attention to it? Well, and the answer is 99% of the time, yeah. So in other words, the knowledge that this is not right for you is in you already. But as a child, you learned not to pay attention to your gut feelings because that's how you survived your childhood. If you had paid attention to your gut feelings as a child, you would run away from home, which you couldn't have done. So your capacity to pay attention to your gut feelings has been greatly diminished, but it's still there. So next time you're on somebody, and there's a little niggling, for God's sakes, pay attention to it. Don't question it. Don't try to understand it. Don't try to talk yourself out of it. Believe it. And there's a part of you, you see, that wants genuine love, that wants acceptance, doesn't just want it, knows that you deserve it. If that wasn't there, you wouldn't be asking this question. So it's not like it's totally missing for you, but that's the part you have to strengthen. That's going to take work on your part. So I'm saying get some help, talk about with somebody, and pay attention to your nose. Even though their quiet little nose, quiet little whispering of that's your real self talking to you.
Yeah. I'll just add that if anyone out there is currently in an abusive situation, there's a time and place for therapy, and there's also a time and place for accessing your local resources, like social services and support. People, either women's shelters or people who serve all genders, who offer support around leaving violent situations. And sometimes the first thing you have to do is just take care of your physical well-being, and then once you're safe, then get therapy. And then I'll also just speak to another part of the question that I really appreciated the honesty in this question. The writer mentioned that they themselves can become abusive too.
Yeah.
That's a difficult thing to admit, and so I appreciate, like I said, I appreciate your honesty here. And I would say, from the standpoint of the person who is abusive, of course, there's old pain there, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be treating this person this way. And what happens often is that people want to reclaim some power that they lost.
That's right. And the way you saw power in childhood was through an abusive parent.
Yeah.
And you're identifying with that part of you because you want power, like Hannah says.
So what happens when you have a kind partner who's not the aggressive one? You take on the role of the abuser because it's an opportunity for you to reclaim your power.
Exactly.
And you are responsible for this in adulthood. And I would invite you to develop a self-compassion, mindfulness practice of some kind, that in the moments you feel disrespected, that you feel like your power is being threatened or violated in some way, that you need to exert your power, that you have some ability to self-contain.
And be kind even to your abusive part. Not in the sense of indulging it, but in the sense of, oh, you want some power now, don't you?
So what's another healthy way that we can meet that need?
Yeah. How else could I exercise power that doesn't involve intruding on somebody else?
Yeah. Okay. What inspired you to start learning about and educating others about the meanings and wisdom behind trauma? Your wisdom really motivates me to be a figure of healing for myself and others, so thank you for that too.
There were three streams that flew into that river that became my own healing work. First of all, my own suffering. At some point, I had to start asking myself, well, gosh, you're a successful doctor and you're a writer and, a newspaper columnist and so on, but you're not happy. You're anxious. You're angry. You're depressed. Why? So I had to start asking those questions and do a lot of reading and go for therapy. That was number one. These are not in any order. They really all came together. Number two, in my medical practice, I couldn't help but notice, and again, if I may mention my new book, I talk about this a lot, about how underneath every mental health diagnosis and most physical diagnoses, most chronic physical illnesses as well, there were significant histories of trauma and traumatic imprints. So as a physician, I couldn't just keep administering pills and deal with symptoms or individual diseases. I had to look at the whole person in the context of their multi-generational family history and in the context of their own lives. So what I didn't know, because nobody had taught this in medical school, is that there's a vast body of scientific literature linking trauma and stress and mental and physical illness. So I began to immerse myself in that literature. And the third stream that flew into this was the suffering and unhappiness of my own family, that in many cases was a direct imprint of the way I was being with them. So when your children are not happy, if you're a parent, that's a powerful incentive for you to start figuring out what's going on here. So those three things, my own stuff, what I noticed in clinical work, and the difficulties that my own family was facing. Those are the three big incentives for me to explore this work. And then the more I found out, the more I wanted to share that with the world.
Okay, so we've got about 11 minutes left.
Yeah.
So maybe 2 more questions?
Well, let's just see how it goes.
Okay. So let's pivot to talking about addiction.
Yeah.
For a little bit. So this question reads, I find that I am addicted to men, drugs, attention, food. If I remove most of these, I am left very alone.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have advice for dealing with loneliness during healing?
Hannah, if you just sort of answer that for a moment, I'm going to find a quote that I want to find for people, okay?
Okay.
Let's see what you can say here.
Okay, well, firstly, I'd say I think you ask an extremely relatable question. This is something that so many people grapple with, no matter what it is that they are addicted to. And that, as my dad teaches, that underneath all addictions is some form of emptiness, loneliness, pain, right? So first of all, you feel alone, and I can understand that, and you're not alone in feeling alone. And there are probably many other people on this call who really resonate with that question.
Now, as Hannah said, all addictions, including all the ones that you just mentioned, are attempts to escape some emotional pain. And loneliness is a source of pain, especially for a young child who cannot possibly endure it. So there's an emptiness, there's a pain there that you're trying to fill through all these addictive behaviors. And when you're not engaging in them, you feel lonely. But you know what? Part of healing is the capacity to tolerate your own aloneness. Because your attempt to escape it keeps leading you down the same old self-destructive path that you've been stuck on for a long time. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what drug you use, it doesn't matter how much food you stuff down, or what relationships you had, you're still left, in a sense, even more lonely than before. Because you can't fulfill from the outside that which is missing from within. The quote I was looking for you is by a German poet called Rainer Maria Rilke, and here's what he says. Do not allow yourself to be confused in your aloneness by the something within you that wishes to be released from it. Do not allow yourself to be confused in your aloneness by the something within you that wishes to be released from it. He says, people have, with the help of so many conventions, resolved everything the easy way, on the easiest side of the easy. So that's what your organism is doing right now. You got your loneliness and you want to resolve it easily. You eat something. You use a drug. You get into a relationship. But it is clear that we must embrace struggle, he says. Every living thing conforms to it. Everything in nature grows and struggles in its own way, establishing its own identity, insisting on it at all cost, against all resistance. So there's something in you, and that's what the part that's asking the question, that wants to be really yourself. To be alone is not the same as being lonely. You may need to be alone for a while, but that doesn't mean that you need to be lonely. It's how you relate to that aloneness. Now, that doesn't mean you can't ask for support, but it's a question of what kind of support. If you're feeling stressed, upset, angry, or lonely, or just bored, and you turn on the cell phone and you start scrolling aimlessly, or you get on YouTube and you start scrolling aimlessly, or you reach for that snack, or that drink, or that drug, or that relationship, you're asking for help, but it's temporary help that causes you more harm in the long term. If you can recognize that emptiness, that loneliness in you, and you ask for help, not to escape from it, but to get support for it, for example, by joining some 12-step group, or some other therapy group, or a meditation class, or a yoga class, or a therapist, you're not alone anymore. You're asking for help, but you're asking for help that isn't a temporary self-soothing. So that's would be my answer to that. So to make the distinction between aloneness and loneliness, they're not the same thing.
Okay, I was going to say that we need other people. We don't exist in a vacuum. We actually can't survive completely alone. I mean, I guess some people who are highly spiritual go off and do that and sit in a cave and be alone for a while. But for the most part, we need other people. But the question is, how are we relating to other people? And can we do that in a conscious way? So can you learn to sit with your aloneness and then join someone else and share in that together and ask for what you need in a healthy way and come from a place of consciousness rather than incessant need?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this will be our last question.
Okay.
Working as a teacher in education, I wonder, how can we help and prepare our children and students to live a good and meaningful life in a world full of trauma?
Yeah. So here's the thing. There are some studies that show that if a child experiences really warm, attuned, safe relationship for the first 3 years of their lives, and then they experience all kinds of potentially traumatic events afterwards, they're going to do a lot better than a child who experiences difficult experiences for the first 3 years and then it's all good afterwards, which indicates the importance of setting the base, the secure base in that person as early as possible in life. In fact, there was a psychiatrist who studied concentration camp survivors after the Second World War. And what he found is that those who had secure, attuned, or warm, formative relationships early, they had much less risk of developing post-traumatic stress disorder after the horror of the concentration camps than those who didn't. So one cannot overemphasize the importance of positive early experiences. Now, what does that mean for the educational system? So if you look at the human brain development, and I'm quoting an article from Harvard here, an article I often cite, is brain development is a long process. It begins before birth and continues into adulthood. So the human brain develops through a long, continuous process that begins in the womb, continues into adulthood. As I've said, the earlier, the better the conditions are, the more secure and appropriate that brain development will be. Where do the schools come in? If we understand that brain development continues into adulthood, then you understand that the most important job of the schools is not to teach what year the Battle of Waterloo happened, 1815, or in Canada who the fathers of Confederation were, or in the States, what did the Constitution say, or anything. The most important, in other words, the most important job of the schools, ideally, is not to deliver a curriculum, but to promote healthy brain development. Why? Because the child and young person with healthy brain development will naturally be curious about the Battle of Waterloo, will want to find out about science. How come the clouds become rain? What the lightning is all about. what's inside a molecule. A child with healthy development will be naturally open and curious and seeking answers to everything. Little kids are asking, why? So that means that the job of the schools is to promote healthy brain development, much more importantly than teaching curriculum. School systems don't get that. They're all about conforming rules and curriculum. If schools understood that the most important task that they face is to promote the healthy brain development of children, then they would realize that the most important aspect of any condition that will promote healthy brain development is what we've been talking about the whole day today: safety, emotional safety. And that means contact, emotionally warm, attuned contact with nurturing adults. Now, most teachers don't hear a word about brain development. They don't hear a word about emotional intelligence in their training. So our school system is designed to fit people into a toxic culture, to make people conformists, to learn things they don't care about, and to put up with conditions that are uncomfortable for them. So to the extent that you're a teacher in this system, by developing healthy relationship with your students, by being interested in them as people, by not mistaking the child for their behavior, but by being curious yourself about why do these kids behave the way they do, and how can I make them feel safe and accepted, you'll be promoting healthy brain development, and believe me, they'll be much more compliant and much more interested in what you have to teach them. So to sum that answer up, the most important job of the schools ought to be healthy brain development, and that demands emotionally intelligent and accepting and warm conditions. So that's what you can do as teachers, which very often goes against the demands that the system makes on you.
So I worked at a elementary school in California a couple of years ago as a play therapist and social worker. And I saw a lot of classroom dynamics. And I saw the different systems of influence on the children, which start in government and affect how a principal, has the budget to spend on whatever they have the budget to spend on. Pressures by the state to have testing at a certain time. Whether or not teachers have resources to have enough toys in their classroom. There are so many pressures on teachers, and schools are often, public schools, at least where I worked, they can be really stressful environments for everybody. So I wish the system were different, where it started at the top down.
Yeah.
It's not the case right now, but I would just add on to what my dad said, which is you have to teach the curriculum, but it's what you do in those micro moments while teaching the curriculum or during recess that really are also going to matter for the kids' sense of self and their development. Something we study in my research lab, the Center for Attachment Research at the New School, is called reflective functioning, which is the ability to reflect on one's own mental and emotional states, and in turn reflect on others' mental and emotional states. And this is the basis of empathy, and it begins with caring adults in our lives when we're young doing this for us, mirroring to us, inquiring with us what we might be thinking and feeling, and helping us give language to it. So look up reflective functioning. Maybe you can learn a little bit more about it, but basically it just means take the time to check in with your students, inquire, empathize. I wonder if you might be feeling this today. Is that what you're feeling this today?
Yeah.
Something happened on the playground. Tell me about it. And then also, helping the young minds get curious about other kids in their class and how they might be thinking and feeling as well. And that kind of teaching really happens on a micro moment-to-moment level, where it's not necessarily in a lesson, but it's in the relationship every day.
A lot more to say on this subject. I'll just put in the word play, P-L-A-Y. Our brains are wired for play. So are the brains of other mammals. If you look at little cats or lion cubs or bear cubs or dogs or anybody, they play. Why do they play? It's essential for healthy brain development. Play has been shown to be far more important for brain development than intellectual activities. So the school should have a lot more play and a lot less pressure. I think
that's it. Yeah. So a couple housekeeping things. You can pre-order Gabor and Daniel Maté's latest book by clicking through the link in Gabor's Instagram bio. It's coming out on September 13th everywhere. You can look on his website for upcoming speaking engagements and things like that. And I post about them on the Instagram too sometimes.
And if I can say something, those of you that have local bookstores, I love it if you order through your local bookstore, because the bookstores are an endangered species, and I think they're so important to the healthy culture of a society. And we've been seeing them go under and be under threat because of the retail giants. So I'm happy for people to get my book anywhere, but I'm even happier when I know that they're doing it to their local booksellers, if that's at all possible.
Definitely. And I'll just ask a personal request. If you already have been following me on Instagram at Hannah Rosita, I ask that you unfollow me there, because that's my personal account that I'm trying to reclaim as my personal account, and follow me instead at Hannah Rose Maté. That would help me out a lot.
So at rather than Rosita?
Instead of at Hannah Rosita,
Okay.
follow at Hannah Rose Maté,
okay.
Please, and thank you. And thank you to everyone for joining us from all over the world. Yes, this will be uploaded shortly to the main feed, and we look forward to doing this again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. I have this 2-month book tour coming up, but right afterwards, probably late November, we'll do this again.
Late November, maybe December, when they're in the same city.
Maybe December,
yeah. Okay, thanks everyone. Take care.